There's also seems to be two kinds of policy initiatives that we're involved in now. One on efforts to disseminate and build on the findings of the National Task Force on Teacher Education in Physics, the TTEP report that will be released this summer. It was released last summer, but we're going to release it. That was only preliminary. I'm sure this is Valerie's doing because she likes a good party. Let's just keep having release parties. Anyway, Valerie's on the task force. It's led by Stamatis Fokos. Anyway, so that there's been sort of...
We just released the synopsis last time, and that was just kind of the get ready, here it comes.
Right.
And then we changed a few things.
And so there's some real talk about using this to see if this can be used as a lever. So that's on the one hand, we'll sort of chat about that. And then on the other hand, there's sort of an ad hoc but significant working group gathering on trying to be proactive, at least in the physics community, on addressing what is teacher quality. Given that teacher quality will be defined nationally, and if we don't weigh in, it will be defined based on relatively simple input measures into teacher preparation programs that may not reflect the kinds of qualities that we value.
By think tanks and statisticians, which is
who may have
an interesting group
particular
to define
agenda.
teacher quality, if you ask me.
Right. So anyway, yeah, you might. Right. I mean, there are alternatives, which is to think about. Wait a sec. How is it that these teachers impact students' lives? What is it, in fact, that they are doing? But the problem is it's hard to. It's easy to be sort of simplistic, reductionist, and talk about accountability and rigor and reductionist to a single measure and say I'm going to give a rating from 1 to 50 to all these people, and here you go. And that kind of rhetoric often reigns. Anyway, so that's those are our agenda items, really by way of discussion for us. Would start by having a debrief from the PhysTech meeting. Lori and Valerie and Stephen and I and Ryan, who's not here, were there.
Mike Klimkowski.
Yeah, I mean, so actually, so a bunch of folks showed up. There was also a partner with the UTeach meeting. So Mike Klimkowski, David Webb, Vicky Hand were there. So we had a nice showing.
Julie Andrew is still there.
Yes.
She's still there with 4 of our undergrads are there.
At the UTeach meeting. Okay, so by way of announcements and welcome, so welcome to Danny Rain, who isn't here, but is now, I guess that's because he doesn't start until next week. He's going to be our REU this summer, which is awesome. If you haven't planned to book AAPT, do so. PERC abstracts are due June 3rd, by which you mean, golly, what opportunity. And fabulous things going on this weekend. There's the Boulder Creek Festival, which is great, nice community organization. But in fact, a bunch of our programs are going to be featured at the Creek Festival. And so the Boulder Area STEM Education Coalition has a booth. It's going to be right in front of BMOCA, the museum on 13th Street. We'll be doing some live hands-on demos. The idea is to raise interest and awareness about the Boulder region as being a hub for great science, technology, engineering, and math activities for kids, teachers, future teachers, practitioners. It's a coalition of a bunch of different organizations. So iSTEM efforts will be featured there. Science Discovery will be featured there. We'll have hands-on exhibits.
Is BMOCA the same place as where the farmers market is?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. That's BMOCA is the museum. It's right there.
So, do we start that on Friday, tomorrow?
No, it's Saturday day.
Okay.
So we're setting up. Anyway, so that's going on, and the booth is there. Stop by, hang out, chit chat, or if you have any materials you want to share, come by, and then go get a beer and at the beer tent and support the Boulder Babes.
I will be working from 4 until 10 on Saturday.
Okay.
But I'll be out at the gate. It's watching, make sure you don't leave the area with beer sometimes, and pouring and or drinking out of it.
Okay.
Confiscate that beer.
Exactly. I'll
I'll
take
make
care of
you
that
chug
for
it.
you,
Put it
sir.
right here.
I'll make you chug it, and if you can't chug it, I have to take the responsibility.
And then related to that, by way of warm-up for Valerie, starting at 3 o'clock on Saturday, I'm hosting a party at my house, so if you can make it, come by, please. All right. So, any other announcements?
I'd like to get the summer reading group going.
Nice.
I'd like to shoot for the first Tuesday in June being the first meeting, so setting up the first paper next week. I just want to see what, I was planning on just having the opposite time, Tuesday, in the same location for that. I'm just wondering if anybody has any strong feelings about organizational details there.
Well, here's something our faculty welcomes.
Great question. I think faculty should be welcome. The question is if we want to have a part that's just graduate students. So one
Right.
option is to have grad students meet a half hour in advance so they can hash things out and then teach the faculty.
Right. I think that's a good model.
So, okay. So we could do,
So maybe something like we could do 12:30 to 1:30. 12:30 to 1 is grads, or we could do noon to 1.
yeah. Does anybody? We should see if there's conflicts with those first.
Tuesdays.
Yeah.
That conflicts for me.
Okay. Would
We could.
shifting it back be any better? Or?
Yeah, then Valerie might move our meetings. Tuesdays at 2 for you and I.
We're every other Tuesday,
Right,
A,
but this is to
and
be every
we'll
Tuesday.
move it.
Well, we could Tuesdays at 2 is when we have to be.
Then that would work well then.
We'll work it out.
Yeah.
That'd be nice because then it's before Deber, which is at 3.
No, yeah, that works well.
So, so how long do we want to spend? This Beaver's at 3, we just have a mass exodus. So we can do start at grad students start at 2, and it's a half hour no time for full group discussion.
That's good by me.
Give it a shot, see if it works out.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So I will send out details to the research.
Did you say whether you wanted faculty involved or not?
Yes, he
Oh,
did.
we do. Just
We do?
we'll
Second half.
start out. We'll have beginning just grad students and postdocs, I guess, and faculty can show up at 2:30 then.
Oh,
First half hour is just us.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sounds
great.
good.
Do you want suggestions about reading? I have some good physics reading here from the American Physical Society.
We'll ease into it. Yeah.
I love those. I love those.
Yep.
Got some of those.
But suggestions are welcome. So I'll send out shortly hereafter. I'll send out a.
Do you have an initial reading?
Not yet, but I was going to do some reading.
So let's do a quick brainstorm if you don't mind.
Sure.
And you can take notes on this or ignore them or whatever. Two things immediately come to mind that have been chatted about a lot recently in this group and elsewhere. Depends on how contentious you want to be. So one would be the article by Louis Delorier and company at UBC on a clean scientific experiment, clean education research experiment. Seemed to cause a bunch of controversy here on the Deber list. So I don't know. It's an option. It's actually a nice modeled study with lots of interesting findings there that are kind of worth parsing. And we'll chat a little bit about this. I mean, Carl talked about this as an example. Really interesting question about implications. One of the themes related to that paper that came up in the PhysTech meeting was that I heard these sort of dual messages, which is if you just do all these things and do these appropriate things, you'll see student learning gains. And one of the messages was it's independent of instructor, which is dangerous as an interpretation because we know that instructors do the same thing very differently. but maybe the idea was not that it's independent of instructor, but the message was any instructor can do it. And so that's an important message. Hi there. Mel says hi.
I know.
So,
I heard.
The other paper that came up that we chatted with about that I would suggest we consider is the Doctor and Mestre paper, the commissioned summary of PER and future directions, and maybe we can come up with some additional future directions that include, say, anything that we do in our group in the field. So those would be the two that I would throw out.
I like the second one.
I like the first one.
Well, yeah.
But you guys should meet and consider a theme and make decisions about what along the lines you want to
Right.
choice. Because you might want sociocultural, you might make decisions. And then ask for,
We might do a grab bag.
Yeah.
yeah.
Something else I would really value actually from this group, and from the PER group and from the reading group in particular, is what should be included in the Teaching and Learning Physics course in the fall that will be running. 25 students already. School of Education and Physics. That doesn't even include the teachers that I'm going to sneak in there. Yeah.
Anybody can sit in on that? Can I sit in on it? Can I just take it? Like, just show up?
Audit.
Is it really called?
What kind of credit do I get for your showing up there?
I don't know.
Absolutely.
You can't ask any questions.
The answer is no, not anybody can just sit in on it, which is to say, you want to check with me about it. But yes, you can. And you should spread the word. So exactly, postdocs in a group totally should and shouldn't have to pay tuition, blah, blah, blah. But yes, so let's figure out a way. But any suggestions from this group about what would be good to go in on that? Because it was a really great class in 1998. And while it's nice to read some of the old school literature in the field, it might be worth updating.
So be careful, because if postdocs come, they might actually have to run the course. That's kind of what he suggested.
What a great opportunity. And Julie and Andrew and I are, over the summer, in the process of starting to develop a teaching and learning chemistry course. So,
Awesome.
we've been looking at what's been happening in physics and biology, but
Awesome.
All right. Anything else? So, how many of you have heard of PhysTech? How many of you all have heard of PhysTech? So PhysTech is the American Physical Society's, it's the lead organization, but it's joint with the American Association of Physics Teachers and the American Institute of Physics. It was a grant from NSF to these organizations to seriously engage physics departments in teacher education, recruitment, and preparation. And it was started by Fred Stein, who was Ted Hodap's predecessor at the American Physical Society. Fred built it up to about 6 or 8 sites. He left right as they were soliciting, I think, the second round of sites. We're a first round site, and so it was built out to maybe 9 folks, 12 folks when he left. Ted built out a parallel organization to PhysTech called PTech, which also stood for the Physics Teacher Education Coalition. They've since re-merged now, and I think that they have 220 sites. How many physics departments are there in the United States?
700 and some. 768 or something like that.
Yeah.
I surveyed them all.
I think there are 768 programs and 600 and some departments. Right. Programs or departments. So there's some that are only...
There's that many chairs,
certificate-
department
French
chairs.
to be a PhysTech site, what was required to be called a PhysTech site?
It depends on what level of participation. There are 3 levels of participation to be a PhysTech site. So the simplest is to sign on with a letter and endorse and say that this is important for a physics department to do. And for that, you get your name up on the website. You get
That's
the...
PTech.
It's now called PhysTech.
It is?
That they've remerged. That's right. And it used to be then that PhysTech, that used to be P-Tech, and now, then the second level of participation is a small level of grant money flowing. I think $50,000 to $75,000 going from the APS to the departments in order to start doing programmatic work. Several sites, for instance, are committing to teacher recruitment and preparation in the physics department by replicating the Colorado Learning Assistant program. The most aggressive participation was up to a couple of $100,000 per year for up to 3 years, and that was to hire a master teacher, to commit to radically increasing the number. They didn't actually set goals, but the idea was to double or triple the number of physics majors coming out of a department, and to build new courses, and so that was the original structure of which we followed it. We had a series of master teachers, and they haven't stuck in the physics department with the exception of through FET. So that's PhysTech. They, about 5 years ago, started instituting an annual meeting where they gathered all the initially PhysTech and then included P-Tech sites. This year was the largest. I think 120 some to 150 people showed up. Lots of different institutions represented. I'm going to say 30 plus different institutions represented of all different kinds of scale and size. There was a theme actually to this
Building sustainable programs.
building sustainable programs. I will say that this organization is the largest organization or network among institutions for committing to teacher preparation in physics. So it's, this is the place where it's happening. This is the community where if you're concerned about it, where people go and hang out. Based on the success of PhysTech, a C-Tech is being developed. Lori's very involved in that. We'll be going into a meeting in a couple of weeks to build the Chemistry Teacher Education Coalition from the American Chemical Society.
And one of our former Noyce fellows, who's now teaching, is also deeply involved in this. And it's like, she's like really well known now throughout the nation by folks you run into. If they're like chemistry education folk, and then I'll be like, oh yeah, my colleague Shelley, and they're, oh yeah, we know Shelley. She's been, because she comes to the meeting. It's pretty awesome that she's, engaged in the national dialogue like that.
And the ACS love her and are trying to put her to as much work as possible.
Which is a tragedy, but necessary tragedy. But it's like, it's so cool because we wanted to see teachers engaged in these high-level conversations about teachers. Because for too many years, teachers were not involved in these discussions. Isn't that amazing?
I'm hoping that Shelley isn't the only teacher at this meeting at ACS, but I will report back if that is.
The one that's coming right up, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, there weren't a lot of teachers at PhysTech
This year, yeah.
this year. In the past, we've had more. But uncorrelated from that, actually, it was one of the best sessions. It's be even better with more teachers. So maybe we'll just do a quick round robin about what stood out about this conference, specifically with regard to, where we're at as a group. There were 3 keynote addresses. Eugene Levy from Rice University
Also on the task force.
talked about the university's engagement in educational practices.
Somewhat anecdotal talk,
Yeah.
I would say.
Didn't you think it was good?
It was good, but it was not sort of a researchy talk. It was very much like his experiences, his personal experiences, kind of recounting the history of what happened at his institution.
Good speaker.
Eric Brew, our colleague from Florida International University, gave a talk entitled "The Physics Teacher's Dilemma." Really addressed the argument saying, the omnivore's dilemma: you can eat anything you want. What do you eat? The teacher's dilemma: you can teach anything you want. What do you teach? His answer: models. Why? Because he's a modeler. But that's a perfect. But he also gave a really nice this is the first time actually that I heard really externalized the real power of modeling is not that we don't do it elsewhere. We all do modeling. But to focus on modeling focuses the attention on classroom practice at a really groovy scale. Concepts and conceptual development is too narrow of focus, and there are a whole slew of concepts, and it's harder to see the relations among them as well as the choice of what to do. You can move out to sort of full-blown coherent theories and structures, but maybe that's too large, whereas the nature of models operates at the right scale, according to Eric. And the definition of model that I really liked was from David Heston, is the sort of founder of this, systematic representation, a representation of systems is a model. Yeah?
Are these talks available online?
Should be.
Like video or audio or?
Don't there's
They should be. I don't know if they were videotaped. I will ask, because it would be worth looking at his understanding. The other nice thing about modeling, I had known this, but I hadn't heard it framed in this way. It is a coherent curriculum from pre-college through college, which allows not only for the coordinated development of individual students, so that you do the same kind of thing in high school that you do in college, which we certainly don't do now, but also allows for the coherent deployment of, for teachers, of teaching as how you were taught. So the idea is that you can really engage in the same kind of practices. So that's actually kind of nice, that it's a curriculum and pedagogical approach that spans high school or college. And then the third keynote was Carl Wyman, who did a nice job about arguing basically for the implications of ideas from the learning sciences. His argument is that classroom research, I think, which he would put PER into largely, the learning sciences, folks from cognitive science and psychology, and neuro are all coming together now in unique ways, those disciplines, and those findings are supporting one another in powerful ways. So he summarized a bunch of those and gave some great examples, lots of fabulous shout-outs to Colorado, which is nice, partly because we do a lot of the work. So perhaps my favorite part of it, though, was Ryan O'Block, one of our nice fellows, sort of leaned over to me and said, "This is straight out of the LA class." So, which is kind of nice. So I think I will leave it there and then turn it over to others who went about things that sort of stood out from the conference. Although I'll be happy to talk about, there was a session on sustainability and scalability that I thought very powerful.
Stephen?
Yeah. I don't know if any of you have seen Michael Martyr's presentations. Mike Martyr is a UTeach founder, and he's a UT Austin professor of nonlinear systems, and he has for many years been collecting public data on school systems and presenting them in very novel and sometimes easy to interpret ways. So I've seen a lot of this before, but he gave a workshop which pretty much amounted to showing an hour plus worth of various plots of student learning outcomes in mostly in the Texas school system, and it you know, some of the morals that come out of his presentation are sort of obvious in retrospect, like the prime driver of student learning outcomes in the K-12 system in Texas is poverty level. And he has pretty compelling data to make the case, and you might sort of shrug your shoulders and say that's obvious, but I think there's a lot of policy which is not founded on that principle. He made an analogy at the start of his talk that after World War II, the British tried to rebuild their aviation industry. They built a really modern jet, the Comet, and they began selling it around the world, and they began falling out of the sky left and right. And the first thing they said was, we need better trained pilots, which Mike was arguing as an analogy to, when our school system falls apart, we say we need better trained teachers. And it's not that better trained pilots wouldn't have been extraordinarily useful, but it wasn't the fundamental problem that had to be tackled. So that was Mike Martyr's talk, and all that data is available. We might at some point pull it up and play with it a little bit.
We should.
Because there's lots of interesting things. He had some side stories like about charter schools, and that did surprise me. I guess I had not seen data on relative performance of students coming out of charter schools, and it did not match with the political rhetoric that I am familiar with. So that was kind of interesting.
Can you summarize that?
Yeah, Mike, showed some of the arguments for charter schools. The implication being that they offer choice, in particular to people with lower income, and that they're very promising as a better model than the broken public school system. In Texas, he had a plot of some form of outcome. It was some measure of preparation for college on the vertical axis, and the horizontal axis was poverty level as measured by percent of the students getting free and reduced lunches. And it's the usual plot, which is outcomes drop radically as you move to the higher percentage of free and reduced lunches. And it's a scatter plot of individual high schools with big circles for the big schools and little circles for the little schools. And then he asked us to predict where the charter schools, the 120 Texas charter schools, would lie on this plot of like 1,000 Texas public schools.
And before you give the answer, why don't we make a prediction?
Yeah, so what do you guys think? Where did Texas charter schools, the 120 Texas charter schools, lie?
Low on free and reduced lunch.
Say again?
Low on free and reduced lunch.
Low on free and reduced lunch. Do you guys all agree that charter schools will cater to the higher income students? Is that what you're saying?
I think.
Are they on a voucher system in Texas? If they're on a voucher system, I think they would be across the map, but differentially on the lower side, on the higher number of free and reduced lunch, more to the left of your plot that I'm envisioning in my head.
I thought they tended to put charter schools in school districts that had more students with free and reduced lunch. So I would say like suburban school districts are less likely to have charter schools.
So you agree with that?
No,
Disagrees.
he's disagreeing with Ben.
Oh, exactly.
Ben and Ben.
I see.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Okay.
that's on the left hand of the plot.
Yeah,
we'll
now we
call
want
it.
to know the other piece.
Well, Mike Martyr actually puts the left side as
No.
the rich kids and
Yeah.
the right side as the poor kids.
Okay, so it's on the right side. Thank you.
Now
for
we want to
changing-
know
flipping
achievement.
my
How
chart.
does that correlate to achievement outcomes? That was on the y-axis, right?
Yeah, the y-axis was achievement, outcomes, and he had various measures. They were some sort of quantitative measure of preparation for
So
college.
where did have you said yet where they actually fell? in terms
No.
of-
No,
We're still waiting for
predicting.
predicts.
I think they're under, if it's linear correlated, I think they're low, under the line, that linear correlation line.
And
Less lower achievement than the average
schools.
or public school sphere.
But maybe larger scattered.
But yes,
Larger scatter?
larger
Yeah,
scatter.
like just more spread.
There will
Like the
definitely
rest
be
are really
some
good.
that are much higher up.
Yeah.
There are going to be sample points that are much higher up,
Others?
for sure.
And the worst are going to be so bad that they're just going to shut them down. So, like,
The average is usually for charters is as good as or worse than regular public schools, but there are the really high flyers. I agree with the scatter. Larger scatter.
So the result was quite stunning to me. At first, I couldn't see the results because they were almost all on the bottom axis.
Literally on the
On the
zero
zero
y-axis.
So the
Zero.
vast majority, 100 out of the 120. And the
Zero preparation for college.
Zero, yes.
But apparently there's a story behind this, which is that a lot of charter schools in Texas are functioning as the replacement of what would you call it, reform schools or juvenile detention centers. So in lieu of sending people to a juvenile detention center, there's a charter school. So they were spread out quite uniformly on the x-axis, and by and large at the bottom on the y-axis. Certainly nothing like the East Coast, New York Times editorials about how great charter schools are. And
Though that school was represented,
Right.
yeah,
you
there
know.
was. There were like
there is-
four
every
schools.
state
There
has
were four
that
schools
school.
in Texas that were doing a
Yeah.
decent job.
4?
That's what I counted on this.
Four.
slide.
It's
And
hard to say
we're
if,
focused on preparing students for college.
He's
if
got
they really
Google.
are taking these students that would be going to the juvenile detention. It's hard to
Yeah.
compare.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard to compare, and I think he wasn't denying that. He just said that this is the
Yeah,
data.
this is
If you make a sweeping statement about charter schools, this is the sweeping data about the charter schools.
It's beautiful. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
And as
Is
usual,
Texas pretty normal? I wonder how that
He
compares
showed
to
a few other states.
Okay.
Everybody has their own stories. The California story was quite similar, although their few exceptions were quite spectacular exceptions.
but I think what was so interesting, and what always is interesting about anything that Michael Martyr or David Meltzer, for that matter, presents, is that they cause you to say, look at the data before you make these sweeping claims.
Right.
And we do as a society. We make and believe, even as scientists, these sweeping claims about charter schools. I mean, it's not about your physics research, and so you just believe it. And then he shows you the data, and it's just shocking.
He has a live Google Docs that you can
Yeah.
change your choice of the two axes and.
So it was beautiful. I had seen all those data before, but I still just so much enjoyed the session
Yeah.
also.
Let me think. If there was another session that I went to, which I had a negative
Can I ask
emotional.
a question before
Yeah.
you go on? Why do you? Okay, you said really quickly, and I don't know if you could tell me a little bit more about why you said, well, if the kids that are from juvenile detention are being dumped into those charter schools, of course, they're towards the bottom. Why do you think that?
Say that again, please. What was the question?
Oh, he made a comment that if we're dumping the kids into the charter schools, of course they're down at the bottom.
Right. So
I
if
just want to know why
She asked Ben this question.
why he says that.
Yeah, here's the plot that I was.
so the gray, if y'all can see it here, this is all the public schools, and the reds are the charter, and you'll see that they're all along the bottom. In fact, they're slightly disproportionately clustered up in higher.
Huh? Yeah.
higher
well-
knee. No,
Lower.
right.
Lower,
Right.
higher SE. Free reduced lunch.
Okay, so Stephanie, you
Yeah,
have a
I
question
just
for
want
Wyatt.
to know.
So,
why.
because really, the schools would be comparing them to then would be the kind of the last chance schools or these juvenile detention centers, because those students either have not had the educational experiences to succeed or at that level at that point. I mean, it's a very different population. If you take high achieving students and put them into a bad school, but they're high enough achieving going in, they'll come out still high achieving.
And
They
by
might not get
high-
as much as they could.
And,
but
and can I just help you with some language here? By high achieving, you mean successful in
Traditional, right.
traditional
Yes.
school systems.
absolutely.
If they were
Meeting the
successful
SAT
in,
criteria
if they
in
were
this
successful
case
in those
for
traditional
college
systems,
admission.
they wouldn't be in juvenile detention. And so that's just the thing that's
Yeah.
really, really
No, I agree
troubling
with you.
about the words like achieving, is because it makes it
Right.
sound as though those students were somewhat more competent, but they just fit better with the ongoing context.
And that's all the
Right.
distinction of
And that's
asking.
a
you
good
know,
Okay.
point.
I would assume you would also think that kids who are going to juvenile detention probably aren't going to perform as well on college preparedness examinations.
You would also
Yes.
what?
Would you also agree that kids who would be going into juvenile detention probably will not perform as well on college preparedness tests, examinations?
As a whole, probably not necessarily as a rule. No, I wouldn't.
They follow
agree
the
with that.
same rubric as those things that are already designed for a particular population of people.
It's a very similar reason to why lower SES families, students aren't performing as well. They're lower on there. It's a whole host of family life, friend life, preparation in school. So I think they're similar. in
And
many
quality
ways.
of schools, which
Yeah.
we're going to get to actually, I think. So let's move on. No, it's great.
All right. Go
So,
ahead.
so another
Go ahead.
session that I went to, which I was saying I had a sort of a negative emotional reaction to, but it was quite interesting, was Sasha
Kopp.
Kopp from UT Austin.
He's the former associate chair of the UT physics department, one of the powerhouse physics departments in the world, like us. And he's the associate undergraduate chair, former associate undergraduate chair, and in charge of education for the department.
So UT Austin had, I forget the number, but I think it was something on the order of 150 total physics majors undergraduate, and they decided they wanted to increase that number. So what do? What's your solution?
I know what they do.
Recruit?
Easy for us.
You hire a public relations manager.
Nice.
Actually went out and hired a public relations guy who engaged in a recruiting campaign, which was, so this is what my emotional reaction was very negative, because for the first 30 minutes of his talk, it was all about advertising and propaganda, no substance whatsoever, no changes to the department, just all the gimmicks that you do, giving away t-shirts and getting the physics department in the newspaper for dropping pumpkins off the building and giving away money, and it was all advertising. But they did double the number of majors in 2 years. It was a quite spectacular change. Where do you get them from? Who do you recruit them from? Their answer was they looked around campus and noticed that the chemistry and engineering departments had thousands of majors rather than hundreds. So they decided that doubling their major was in the root N noise of the chemistry enrollment. So you could just recruit them right out of chemistry without the chemists even noticing.
Yeah, beautiful.
I have my eyes on it.
Well, this is troubling for us in two reasons, which is we're not looking to double. If we double the department, the faculty would revolt. We're already teaching in our upper division courses. We're teaching 50 to 70 students, which means that we go into double lectures. I mean, a large graduation rate nationally is 20 physics majors per year. When they say 120 or 150, that means they graduate maybe 30 a year, maybe.
Right. Right. They were losing half their majors, and I'm really curious a year or two from now when they when they recheck that number, if that fraction is going to go even further down. I mean, what's going to happen with these new recruits?
We graduate about 60 a year here, which is really interesting.
Now, at the end, they did make... So I had to wait for 45 minutes because I raised my hand to ask a question, and I foolishly said, can I ask questions now, or do you want to hold them to the end? And Sasha and the public relations guy had a quick consult and said, I think we'd like to wait till the end. There will be no questions during this workshop. So that was...
So how did the faculty react? Was there any answer to that? Did the UT faculty, their classes are now larger?
Yeah, the UT faculty were involved in the sense that they were informed. There was, this public relations guy comes in, the first thing he does is holds focus groups, finds out everything that's wrong with the department, and then writes a report and delivers it to the department.
That's
Good idea.
And I would say the few substantive changes that they did make seemed to be as a result of the faculty seeing what the issues were, and thinking about honest rather than propaganda solutions to those problems. There was some element of cultural and practical changes that the department has gone through in the last couple of years, besides putting up flyers.
The idea of creating climate was really important.
They did decide to try to make the physics department feel like a home for undergraduates in a number of ways. They also wanted to inform their undergraduates. In their focus groups, they asked seniors, what can you do with a physics major? And the answer was, I don't know, I guess become a college professor. That was pretty much the only answer that any undergraduate in the program had. They had no idea what physics could be used for in life other than academic track.
We'll take questions at the end, Ben.
Are you done? Are you guys speaking? Okay. Yes, I just wanted to follow up on that. So, apparently they took more effort to inform people about careers, but was there also increased networking with local industries and these non-traditional, non-academic careers?
So they started a program. So they started a course for freshmen, which was basically about what you do. It was about career tracks, and they are bringing in alumni. So it's sort of like Noah's PFPF idea of bringing in alumni to talk, only instead of graduate student focus, it's undergraduate. they involved SPS, so they got undergraduate physics majors to do the recruiting for the freshman classes. Although that doesn't really address your question about
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm
informing.
just thinking, I mean, the
This is
reason there's more
propaganda.
chemistry majors is because there's more jobs in chemistry. Is the way, you know, so, I mean, to what point do you say it's just not worth trying to recruit?
Yeah, well, he had an interesting comment, which was, UT Austin is producing 1,500 chemistry. Well, they have 1,500 chemistry majors, and there's not enough jobs for them when they graduate. And so, what I immediately wanted to ask was, I see, so we want to replicate that in physics now? I mean, he kept saying, when you hire a public relations manager, the first question they're going to ask you, and you really have to answer this, is why do you want to double your program? He never actually answered that. He didn't even talk about it. Like, why did they want to double their program? It just somehow spoke for itself in this presentation that, of course, we want to double the number of majors. And so even though he said that, this is a really hard question, and he kept pounding us on it, and we really had to think about it, interestingly, he never talked about what the department decided was the reason for wanting to double the number of majors.
Did he give any information as far as the demographics of the new students? Was there, was it
Nope.
similar?
Nope, stolen from chemistry and computer science, apparently. I think I'll stop here. There were a couple of other fun sessions. Actually, I will mention one other one. Hunter Close, who is at Seattle Pacific University, now moving to Texas San Marcos or something. Do you guys know? Yeah. He has been very involved in LA. Their version of the LA program and teacher preparation. And one of the activities that he does with their LAs, which he was basically sharing in this workshop, was an activity in which all the students in the LA class are asked to find a friend or some other undergraduate who is not a physics major or even a science major, who hasn't really studied physics. And they interview them on tape for roughly an hour, doing a clinical interview to try to figure out what they know about this topic in physics. And it's not meant to teach them, it's just meant to find out what they know. And this has apparently been a very formative experience for their LAs. It's been really an eye-opening activity for them. They do it twice. The first time, I think they are guided in what physics topic they will be investigating, and the second time they actually make up their own interview protocol, and it exposes the LAs to lots of things, including the wealth of ideas that intelligent young people have about physics, even though they have no formal understanding or training. And I guess their feeling is that to be a successful teacher, you must A, know how to get into somebody's mind in this way, and B, appreciate that there's something there to get into, both of which seem to come out of this activity. So I thought that was kind of inspiring. And
we've been doing that in elementary science methods for quite a while with the elementary teachers, and another part of it is just to learn how to not teach when you talk to students, just listen
not be
to them.
judgmental.
Yeah, and so the elementary students, the elementary teachers that were in my class would always say, well, you have to teach us about buoyancy, because it was always sink and float. That's the content that seems to be really kind of easy for them to do. But teach us about this first so we can know where we're going. And it was like, no, that's exactly not what we're doing. We're learning about this concept later. So it's a really good thing that they don't even know it yet when they try to find out what students know. For all they know, students are right or wrong.
Yeah, and we knew that they were doing this at Seattle Pacific and got some of their materials and tried this on a very small scale past spring semester
With our
LA course.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
How'd that
Very,
go?
very early on, it's like week 3 or so. So right around the time when they're learning about how to ask questions. And I think the big thing that did come out of it was resisting the urge to teach and having to just listen and figure out what they knew and what they were thinking. And so doing that early in the semester
Couldn't
seemed
do
to
it.
help them make
I think we we do need to put that in the LA class, because even as we watch the videos that Kara and Ben have been taking, you watch even in week 15, week 14, they're still doing an awful lot of telling, and I think that we need to do some better training.
I mean, one of the things I got out of this workshop was there was a lot of immediate concern in the audience of this workshop that this was Hunter's vision of how you teach. So Hunter had a bunch of quotes from I've forgotten the name, but it was a psychologist.
Quine, probably.
No, it was a psychologist from the 1960s who was developing a form of psychotherapy in which you stop guiding your client. You're just finding out what they think and believe, and you accept your client, and so the implication, the subtle implication, was that perhaps this is an extreme model of teaching by inquiry, is that you stop teaching at all and you just open it up and let the student generate their ideas, and you're just there to sort of collect their ideas. And people were fighting back and saying, well, this is nuts, you have to teach them, at some point you have to teach them. And Hunter allowed this to go on. He like accepted people's ideas. At some point he said, as a teacher, there's a back and forth in which you do need to spend some time not guiding, but finding out what your students think, and then if you do have an endpoint, you can use that to take them to the endpoint. But you need this moment of no judgment, no goal, just finding. And so I think in the end, this was his claim, was that this is just a skill that if you don't teach it in isolation, probably gets confused by most of us with also the end goal of moving a person to where we want them to be.
And I also think having this interview experience gave each of the LAs, they did their own interview, they had their own experience with this, and then we could tie back in when we were getting into formative assessments. They knew what the ideas were in that particular situation that they could attach that to, versus the papers that we assigned them to read, and so.
Did the LAs either here or there, did they write reflections on their video? Did they review their video?
Yes, they do. They do transcription and evaluation. We saw some of the transcripts of what they had written about the interviewing process. So that was part of the exercise.
And ours was not that formalized, just trying bits of this first semester. But I charged Steve with coming back and reporting to me. I had to leave to go to the airport. I was like, Tag, you have to tell me what you learned this session.
I mean, there's lots of learning goals, I think, in this activity, and one of them was they're teaching LAs also how to do clinical interviews, which includes transcription and evaluation and summary of the interview. So that was also part of the whole exercise.
It could be useful if our LAs turn into future noise fellows.
Or future researchers of any kind.
Yeah.
A teacher is a researcher.
Yeah. They can be.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you, but a teacher is a researcher. They have to know how to collect data on the fly and be able to make decisions or interventions, if you will, immediately. That's the difference between the researcher and the teacher.
I think there's plenty of teachers who fundamentally do not do that, but that's why
Oh,
they're not
that's right.
teachers.
That's what, hopefully.
Depends on your definition of teaching.
So we should move rapidly on
Yes.
to some opportunities for everybody to talk a little bit more about the original question regarding the role of PER in teacher preparation. I'll just say briefly that the conference was great. The session that I was in several sessions, one of them I was on a panel that had to do with how U-Teach replication interfaced with phys tech, and it ended up being kind of like Michael Martyr was also on the panel, says, well, let me just tell you first off, we have no physics majors in U-Teach. We can boast huge numbers of recruitment. Well, they just have very few. Their numbers are very small, like 2 and 3, and they're not. Ours are bigger, and so he's still struggling, trying to understand how. All right, and then some other panelists got up and said, well, we're kind of just get starting. We don't have physics teachers either. And then only 2. And then I, of course, come up and say, well, let me just tell you what we've learned from the task force about recruiting teachers. And so the conversation became about having a champion and a climate in the physics department that is amenable and accepting and promoting and supporting to people who want to become, for the best students to want to become teachers. And Michael was sitting there. It was just so beautiful. I just think he's really an awesome dude. And he's sitting there going, well, that's our problem. That's our problem. There's nobody there. Not even me. I'm not there. Because he's kind of become the director of UT. And he's like, I got to figure out how to make this climate, the culture, the environment. So that was really, really a beautiful discussion. Huh?
You should talk to Sasha, apparently.
Apparently.
Who's the one who's creating the climate there.
Who had just left, actually. He was sitting in there and he made a few statements. But that was really interesting. And then I'll just let Noah say a bit about the section on sustaining changes. A bunch of panelists came up and discussed, their changes within their universities. And there was a lot of opportunity for our groups to talk about what are the main obstacles in implementing and sustaining reform in a physics department. And our group ended up talking about, which I thought was just so freaking interesting, is the biggest obstacle are space issues. Like space issues is a huge obstacle, like our lecture style format. Anyway, so we had a big conversation about that. The end.
Should we hear too?
I guess I'm also wondering what the role of the teacher in residence is in some of these departments. Does that happen to occur in the departments that already have a champion, so they're already working towards these, or can a teacher in residence be a champion temporarily, or? And I guess I was also curious about why the teacher in residence wasn't sustained here, or.
Right.
All excellent questions.
The teacher in residence is a different sort of role, and it depends on the institution, but it's really served as, at many places where TIR is sustained, is as the champion, as the person who interfaces with the future teachers or teacher cert folks, and as somebody who actually is a lead on implementing a bunch of the reforms. And then the TIR is supported by a departmental champion there who doesn't necessarily interact with the students. So in some sense, I mean, there are a bunch of reasons why it didn't work, which we can get into here, but TIR didn't work here, partly because those roles were taken up by Valerie and Steve and myself, and mostly because we didn't have funds for it. TIR was very valuable depending on who the TIR was for our future teachers.
But also, I think also because we didn't depend on it. Like, if you look at Cornell, this is a place where one of the champions is a TIR. And not the same TIR. I've watched this place. You switched out to a new TIR and they're working. It works exactly like it's supposed to. But oh my God, if they didn't have that TIR, they could not run the LA program. And so it's like absolutely necessary. So it's almost like if
We got rid of Mike.
If we got rid of Mike, if we got rid of a lot here in the physics department, a TIR might stick around because it becomes something that absolutely is necessary in order to do things that you kind of want to do.
Is the TIR a high school teacher or a college teacher?
Yeah, teacher in residence from high school who's taught for many years, supposed to, go on leave for a couple of years and then return. Sort of the idea. It doesn't always work out that way. A big stickler for us was funding too. Comments on the sessions you went to?
Well, I was part of a session about recruiting and preparing future chemistry teachers. That's how I ended up at BizTech. American Chemical Society invited me to be on this panel. So there were 4 of us. The others were from Oregon State, Penn State, and Kennesaw State. And sort of one big theme was that, in particular, undergraduates find it very difficult to get both their chemistry or biochemistry major and their certification in the 4 years. And we've even seen that here. Shelley ended up getting her biochemistry degree and then entering, a master's program where she got the certification. And we've had several of our undergraduates do that. We've had a few who have done it, but really it's been very difficult to do it in 4 years. I'm not sure that I know of anyone who's done it in 4 years, 4.5, 5 years. And so the other 3 programs, most of the chemistry teachers that they're producing are coming out of master's programs, master's plus programs, and so they're not recruiting as heavily into undergraduate programs where they would be getting their degrees and their certification. At Kennesaw State, their goal is to produce 20 to 25 chemistry teachers a year, and they are almost there. It is mainly a master's program, but they also have a big advertising campaign. They have a billboard in Atlanta. They have all sorts of things going on. They have several faculty in the chemistry department who they are hired for chemistry teacher preparation, basically, and that is their main focus. And I think they have 3 chemistry education researchers on their faculty there, so that goes a long ways as well. And then otherwise, you have the same sorts of things that came out of Michael Martin talk, and I think those were the main things for that sessions. Oh, and also, so, in physics, you have the Washington tutorials, and they're, you also have these open source tutorials. There just seem to be a wealth of well-designed research materials that are fairly, doable to implement in various places. Even opening, the open source tutorials allow you to sort of adapt them to your particular situation. Fabulous instructor guides, videos of students, working through these things. And I feel this doesn't exist in chemistry, and I'm just jealous. We have COBOL materials, there's a process-oriented guided inquiry learning materials. That's about the most complete package we have. And so I'm pondering, I know other people have worked on things and they're just not out there as readily available.
The PLTL stuff isn't like readily available stuff?
Well, PLTL...
Peer-led team learning.
There are some materials that you can use with that, but a lot of the faculty who are using peer readers are maybe making their own little worksheets or things like this. So, there's potential to sort of gather up some of those. I know some materials that have come out of Berkeley. I'm part of the problem too, and we have developed materials in chemistries for the SCI. My job in June is to make sure those are all archived and readily available. But even the next step then of having the instructor resources, and here are the student ideas that you're going to run into, and here's a link to a video of students working with these materials. It just seems like there's really nice resources in physics that I'm pondering how we get to that point in other disciplines.
That actually reminds me of something else that came up, and I was stunned in this community of the lack of awareness of resources. Really amazing. I suppose I shouldn't, but really lots of folks asking for what. If somebody leaned over and said, "What's in LA?" That I kind of get. But people were unaware of studio physics approaches, tutorials. This is the community of self-selected folks who are committed to enhanced education. So it does remind me, and Stamatis drove that home in our sustaining and scaling. He started by saying, let's start by thinking about using the right materials and right resources, and there are a slew in physics you might not be aware of. Really amazing to me. Last thing about the sessions, I was on a sustaining and scaling session, and the community basically, the 4 speakers, and I and the workshop participants came up with just a really fabulous list that in some sense spanned the space of what I know about sustaining and scaling, which is kind of neat. So I'm writing that list up, and I'll share that with whoever wants. Certainly send it back to Charles Henderson, who's working on these things, but fits very much with our other frameworks and our understanding things. So in that sense, I was fairly impressed. I think Ryan O'Block's quote, just to say, Wyman was just like straight out of the LA class. That was fabulous. Perhaps the quote of the meeting for me was by Ted Hodap in this session saying, if you are assigning textbook problems that are end of the chapter problems from your textbooks to your students in your classes, you are being immoral.
Yeah, our table had a big discussion about that, and we did not agree with him.
Howard Gopstein says that people should be suing teachers for malpractice.
So,
we had a big argument about
we
that.
don't have to burn the
too.
teachers anymore. But all right. So shifting gears
Wait,
very
I have
briefly.
one more last comment that,
Oh, yeah.
it was so interesting. I heard this like 3 different times, like at presentations, people are presenting stuff, and they're like, well, not everybody can be a CU Boulder, but what we can do is make some small steps in transformation. It was really incredible to hear that kind of discourse, and they literally say it just like that. It blows your mind.
Really was remarkable how well.
Could be a CU Boulder.
It's like,
That's
well,
just what you
yeah,
say
you
with
can.
it, so.
But it's interesting to hear, so.
It was lovely. I mean, for an institution that was not right. I mean, anyway, CU Boulder remarkably well represented there, and for our programmatic work and achievements, really.
Okay, switching gears.
Yeah, so I'm sensitive to time here, but particularly interesting. There's 2 pieces that, if you have thoughts on about how to weigh in. One is sharing the findings of the National Task Force on Teacher Education in Physics. I'm particularly interested, though, in thinking about measuring K-12 learning in physics. This is a response, frankly, to the charge Ted Hodap and Monica Plish of the APS gathered a group of people together to talk about teacher quality. And what does teacher quality mean in physics, and what does it mean from a research perspective? I'll make 2 observations. So one is, it turns out that University of Texas does have a really nice observation protocol, the UTOP.
We also have one here in Colorado
Okay.
that's being tested.
The CU talk. Well, anyway, so there's a nice paper that just got sent out, and the protocol along with it from Martyr. If anybody's interested, let me know. We can forward that.
And we should get the one from here.
And we should
It's
get the
been
one from-
rigorously developed and tested by folks in Denver and here. And Jenny Whitcomb is the main contact on that. I'm sorry, the name isn't coming to me right now, but we're using it in our teacher ed program
Okay.
instead of the UTOP.
That's for urban teaching.
The Urban Teacher Observation Protocol, so UTOP.
Okay. That's
No.
different. Is it? Really?
No, but it's not the Texas observation.
Right. Okay, we
But I
should
don't
use
think
the same
it's got
acronym.
some other name.
So,
And then,
I can't
and then the suburban teacher observation, the STOP.
Yeah.
So, if you have thoughts about how we might talk about teacher quality at the national level, turns out to be really, really challenging. I mean, something like the STOP or the UTOP or the other UTOP or the RTOP, each of those we could argue against and demonstrate the limitations of. Charles Henderson and I contributed a little bit. It's a really nice critique of the RTOP. Among other things, it only looks at what's happening in the classroom as opposed to what the students are doing. But even that, all of those are extraordinarily expensive and time-consuming and hard to engage in. So the question is, how is it that we talk about this in a way that is practical but still captures some of the nuance? So that's one point. And then the other point is there are some zeroth order questions. You want teacher quality from the physicist perspective or from the physics community's perspective. This is the first step in teacher quality in physics. Really interesting. Have a physics teacher. Okay? That is the first step because every student must take physics and every student has the right to take advanced physics in our country. turns out that's the arguments where we have to start making the arguments, which I didn't realize so well, but that's where the arguments need to be made, at least politically. But that's a quality issue. Having somebody there is a quality issue. To me, it's a little bit close to saying we should have education or that people should have food. But those are a little bit more removed, but not all that far removed. So anyway, that's the scale of the challenge that we're facing. We could either have another session on it or collect ideas now.
We should definitely take some time to talk. People need a chance to talk.
Tarot talk time.
I'm a restless individual.
Yeah. I'm also sensitive to this being late. Well, what do you all...
But we have 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's talk. Groups.
Topic, once again.
How do we define teacher quality in a practical way in physics? What tools do we use? Go.
I've been thinking about this since I was on a thesis committee about the
So you think we should be measuring the average curriculum assessment?
That's
Whatever the
Let me just think of some concrete things that we actually do know a lot about. To say, we know about conceptual development, we know about the development of attitudes and beliefs. As Carl pointed out, as critical components of teaching, 2 of the 4, motivation was a third, development of reflective abilities and cognitive abilities.
So I already am worried because it's so easy for me to see flaws with the FCR and CE as a measure of conceptual understanding. I know these instruments so well, and so since I recognize that the instrument is flawed, I'm also very worried that if we rely on it as a measure of student learning, we're like going in a terrible and dangerous direction of making a test score a proxy for something that I don't really understand. Conceptual understanding.
attitudes and beliefs about physics and learning.
No, I'm still talking
So that's
about like
different.
what does it mean for
You
somebody
get
to
a high
understand?
FCI score, that doesn't mean you have a deep conceptual.
And if you have a low FCI score,
Attitudes and beliefs
doesn't mean you don't have a pretty good understanding.
So that's the second thing.
Well, there's lots of reasons why you can have a low FCI score and still understand
Like
Newton's
Ben,
laws quite well.
fine. It says
In a way which is appropriate for your place in the
what they're doing.
freshman.
And I think they're 2 different things. That's why. I think they're different
Carl just
And they're
sometimes
both
see the
important.
FCI as like,
And they both should be
well,
looked at.
you
And I
did a
don't
good
think you
job,
should assume
and you
they're
know
gonna be
physics. If you don't score well, you did a bad job, and students didn't learn physics. So already, I'm worried about that.
I mean,
And
look
then
at what comes
we're
out of
using
your
that
dad.
as sort of one of the baseline, like we know this about teaching.
Let me ask, is that
So,
as bad as
What
we're
else?
doing right now? CSAT scores?
Oh, it's not all of that.
So rather than step in the right direction, you take it to the
I mean, the CSAP is different everywhere, which is a very good thing. And the question is just whether it's measuring the things that we're interested in. And I see a few CSAP questions that look like they were, and some CSAP questions that seem like they weren't.
Questions are research.
Yeah, but the amount of for the amount of research that went into the FCI, it's
So,
It's a question of we're improving the measure of assessment, but
maybe not. I mean, so Mahajan would say, or maybe even Ellie would say no, by instituting any kind of standardized assessment like that. You're making your institutionalizing a bad nature of knowledge, bad science. The flip side is, I think that these things probably do serve it. Well, let me play counterpoint to that, which is say they're not entirely terrible proxies, but you can find instances. You do find SCI scores highly correlated with your grades in your class.
Yeah, that's not.
Well, come on. I mean, the point is, so what?
Yeah, it depends on how
Things are so unbelievably bad, right? And the question is there evidence? The point is that you, in some sense, you know too much. Right? This is a research-based, naturally sourced law of question about it.
So, like what you started off with, a good definition of what it is now.
Other ideas? I mean, scalable other ideas as far as assessment?
So now I guess we're heading in, if I'm following the thread, we're arguing that we're talking about how do you evaluate teachers, and we're now honing in on evaluating teachers by giving an assessment measure to their students. And so I started off by questioning whether the assessment instrument is measured.
That's my job.
Well, we want let's just accept that flawed it is.
How to write a resume, how to,
Then you can
really,
need to go to the what's wrong with no child.
it's not a science.
It's just that you're not really measuring students' learning of physics, you're measuring how poor they are. When you give an assessment measure. So you're evaluating the teacher on how rich their kids are.
But what if you measured a teacher? I mean, now here's the question I was going to get before. What if we measure value adding, the positive sense of value adding, as opposed to
Hey, normalize gain.
or gain? Because the point is, I mean, what is wrong with measuring? Let's say you had a perfect. Let's flip this around. What if you had a perfect measure? What's wrong with evaluating teaching based on?
So Mike Martyr has some evidence that there was a study done in which teachers were randomly flipped between environments, and they used the standard metrics of evaluating value added, whether those teachers were good teachers or not. And then when they went into these new environments, it was a very poor predictor. So the argument was that it's not these measures are not doing a great job of telling you who's the good teacher.
There is no such thing as who's a good teacher. Who's a good teacher in this environment? I mean, part of it is you're absolutely. This is something that we have to expand, and whether our working group is already expanded. It isn't just about teaching.
However, there's these other students here where these students get screwed by technology so bad it blows my mind. And these are the students that, if God didn't know any better, you can catch it.
But, I mean,
look at their assessments for the kids. And all of a sudden, that last
we got to hear what you have to say, but you come back.
They can get it all they want, but they cannot.
No. Next week we'll solve it.
So you also have.
It seems to me like when you have a good assessment tool with this, that should be
Even though they are indistinguishable from Joe Skinner gradation, but they've got to have some in their car, on their
And I mean, part of it is conceptual learning.
well, let's do it section.
No, I was because I have one of those kids. and I think I have an issue with using student achievement to measure quality. Period. I don't know exactly if we're doing a good job with that, and I'm not exactly sure how to deal with that. But I know there's something unsettling about measuring teacher quality based on student achievement, and in that one time frame. Like, okay, we're gonna measure how. Yeah, there's something. I don't know if it.
That's could make that time frame. What is the opposite?
So I mean, the question is but that's where something like bar talk or might be failing because you did engage
That they get it, but the way that they're being assessed is not a way for that particular student to show or display that knowledge that they have.
Right.
So this is
Right.
another issue.
Because if you give my kid an interview, he'd get A's all through certain classes, but he's not right. Yeah, yeah, it's not going to happen with here's a timed test, answer these questions. Right. Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Collective school education.
Not just assume.
Well, I think that it assumes if we're linking them, we're assuming. I think in part what we say that we don't, which is the teacher is filling the students with something, or the teacher is like that. I don't know. There's something weird about that for me, and I don't know exactly what it is. That the way the student performs.
And I mean,
like,
the answer is yes, we're built on theory.
Well, wait. No, but I mean, okay.
Yeah, people like mine are coming.
Can I borrow one of your? Can I borrow one of these?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, start with number 1 though.
Yes.
Those are series 1, 2, and 3. Can we come back in a minute?
I know, look at Noah getting all practical on me, and me getting all Noah's like,
The world has
you
changed.
have to actually make a measurement, goddammit.
Right. Right.
All right, can we come back? This is not just a sort of abstract piece. I mean, so we have actually a working document that we are welcome to contribute to around this question. So what did you all think?
The question, what is a good teacher? We found kind of conflated what is a good teacher and how do you measure what a good teacher is. And they're two separate issues, both I think are important. Do we want to focus on what is a good teacher? That's the question on the table.
You focus on what you think is important.
I think in answering the questions that it really matters why and for what purpose and who is trying to do the measuring. I mean, are you trying to do it as a way of encouraging people to teach better, or are you trying to do it as a high stakes way, like we're going to take things away or give you things if you're not on this level? And it's a different answer depending on what your goal is.
Right.
What if your goal is just the broad goal of improving K-12 education in the U.S.?
Right.
I mean, is that what because you're talking about a specific document, is that?
Well, this is going to be, there's a working task force to respond to, there is a National Center for Teacher Quality that's coming out with a report that's going to evaluate teacher quality based on the School of Ed courses they took and what the syllabi of those courses were. That's going to help frame the national dialogue about how funding gets allocated, both punitively and proactively, positively, with a broader goal, presumably. Let's assume that we're living in a society that's looking to improve the education for all students for that longer-term broad goal. So it's all of those things.
That test though has their tests, their metrics have nothing to do with the actual outcomes of those teachers. They in no way attempt to say this is what a good teacher is.
So what did you guys talk about?
Mike had a good point.
I don't understand why we feel the need to come up with some standardized measure of how somebody executes a highly complex job like this when no other profession in the world has anything analogous to this whatsoever. It's completely absurd to me that we think we can develop some sort of external thing that we can apply to teachers who operate in so many different the number of contexts we're talking about are so bewildering. Like to think of applying something to a kindergarten teacher and applying something to my teaching. I mean, that's just one example.
Right.
And what other profession has anything like this?
I want to ask you, like, well, what do you think about whatever they use for medical? Prepare yourself to be a doctor, whatever it is that's necessary to pass in order to say you are now a doctor.
Okay, so
Medical boards?
that's different than a practicing teacher.
Let's talk about that.
Well, we have that. We have the place and the praxis. We have the coursework that's involved. You know, and
Right.
do we have residencies and things like that? Should we? That's a great
My
conversation.
wife is a nurse. She has to go through exams every 3 years, or she loses her license.
Teachers have to do, though, they have to do continuing education courses. You have to, depending on what state you're in, you have to keep taking
She
courses.
has to take tests.
I mean, let's say we played to this. Let's say we did, work with the praxis. The question is the praxis good? Is the praxis helping us do what we want? Turns out in physics, not so good. The ETS praxis too, at least, that I'm familiar with.
There's not a correlation between high praxis scores and higher student outcomes.
Sorry, praxis.
Praxis is the name of the test.
It's a standardized test to get your license.
Yeah.
I know in most fields there is a correlation between scoring high on the praxis and, I believe,
But
And
we don't
student
know
outcomes
what that
on-
correlation
on
represents.
standardized tests.
We do not.
SATs.
Let's face it, there's no way that the praxis measures what it is that we're concerned about. That's all content knowledge.
But
I
it seems
care
to be,
about
be a predictor.
Yeah,
which
it's
is
predicted. There's a
interesting.
correlation. And I do care about content knowledge. I want my physics teacher to have physics content knowledge. There needs to be a bar there, in my opinion.
Right, yeah. It's necessary, but not sufficient.
Sure.
So, okay, but, so that's, I mean, maybe this goes back to Martyr's point, though, which is to say, and you could say the same thing about the medical industry or engineering, which also has professional licensure and the rest of it. But our educational systems are not doing what it is that we hope that they're doing. And that's whether that's measured by competitive measures or whether that's measured by access for students or disparity in achievement along a variety of things. There are very few people who I'm aware of who make compelling argument. In fact, nobody I'm aware of that makes a compelling argument, but a few that I'm aware of that make an argument that says things are just fine. Now, when people are taught, so that leads to this question of teacher quality. So, and maybe the answer is to say you can't put it on the teacher, sort of Martyr's point, partly your point about this.
Context.
If we expand the nature to say, all right, what's the nature of learning environments, and what's the assessment of quality learning environments, or learning,
Larger context.
the larger context of that, what is it then that how do we shift that dialogue to evaluate that?
But I think part of the trouble, and I think this gets at your comment too, is that the recent trend to do more evaluation of teaching has probably lowered the quality of teaching that's going on. And any time that you try to do this massive, large-scale evaluation, that's probably going to be the outcome because it's a complicated thing. You can't come up with one measure and apply it to everybody and get anything meaningful out. So suddenly people aren't trying to improve their teaching, they're trying to do well on whatever measure you come up with, which by definition of a large scale isn't going to be a very good measure.
And none of these other measures, like these boards have, like the test your wife takes, I would guess, have anything to do with her evaluations at her job. That's like a check in the box that you need to get. Continue doing.
Well,
all
it's
the
a little
other
bit
stuff.
more like a content standard.
Yeah.
It's making sure that you're keeping up with recent developments in the field.
But they're not looking at,
Not
the
looking at
outcomes
bedside
of
manner
patients.
or whether your patients are getting sick. Right.
I do think,
The hospital does that, but that's very idiosyncratic. Right? Each hospital will have its own ways of dealing with that.
I agree that the high stakes test we're using has driven down the quality of many classroom experiences. I do think that we could make large gains there too. I think we have very simplified tests, but there are, I think, especially using technology, I think we can create much more dynamic, authentic tests that hopefully you could still test without driving down the quality of the course. I
mean,
think we could do it.
what if we went in addition, you could imagine, let's say you had a perfect test. This is what I was hypothesizing. Imagine that you had a perfect test. Then you could actually evaluate teaching effectiveness based on learning of students. That's not a terrible definition of teaching, is somehow to have impact on those people that you are teaching and sort of your goals of that. Now the question is how are those goals embodied within those tests? So one is to say, all right, we're going to look at what impact you have on students through student achievement along certain metrics. Another is to go in and take a look at the learning environments to say what opportunities are there being created for the students in those environments. And none of those is happening right now. And when you have, high stakes tests at the end, all you end up getting is summative evaluations. You don't get differential evaluations or formative evaluations along the way, which is problematic. But that doesn't mean to say that all forms of assessment are bad.
It's just tapping into the right thing. That like Stephanie kind of brought up this idea of timing. Like we kind of assume the timing at which you can learn, at which you can measure a learning outcome is the amount of time that they spent with you as a teacher. And cool, yeah, it makes sense, right? They were here for a semester. When they come out, you should be able to measure something different. But it might not. That timing is a hard one. Not everybody learns in a linear fashion. Some people learn in a nonlinear fashion. We've got evidence to support the claim that they're on to the next topic by the time they learn the future one. Calculus 2 is a really good example of something you don't really learn until you Calc 3. Or naturally until physics, until higher level physics when you have discontinuities to deal with. And finally your Calc 2 starts coming to fruit. But anyway, so the timing issue was just an interesting thing that I hadn't really considered as how do you deal with that?
So this is invariably where people go when they talk about a reductionist system here and try and create assessments. And I think that that's challenging. But it is happening and is going to continue to happen and will happen. We have the opportunity to weigh in on it. Another thing that I really like that Angela Kelly brought up is to build on things like the NSTA's areas of competency. And we are a community that knows a tremendous amount about the kinds of things that teachers do that are valuable with their students. And I think if we started to contribute to say, you know what, these are the kinds of attributes that teachers should have or things that teachers should be able to do, to attend to environments, to value their students' knowledge to value their students' period coming in, to believe that their students can achieve, and to have high expectations and high demands, high expectations, and lots of resources for your students. Those are kinds of things that I think are really important to get out.
Probably the best assessment would take place with videotapes in the teacher's lounge. Seriously, that's where you'll get, because that's where you hear what teachers think about their students.
Honestly, I think you learn a lot asking the other teachers, asking the students. And as a teacher, I knew who the crappy teachers in my school were. I knew who the good teachers in my school were by and large.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think there's a lot of information there. How do you do that in a systematic manner? It might be tricky, but I think there's a lot of information there that we're not looking at. It's students as well.
All right, well, we have the opportunity to weigh in on this. This is what, our research group is, our obligation is, of course, to do research and create knowledge, but we might as well do some of that that's practical and weighs in on what impacts. And we're being asked to, so let's take them up on the opportunity. Thanks, everyone.